would you say that with the price going up now, we're pivoting back a little bit to the importance of Bitcoin, or are they both sort of heading off in the positive directions for 2017? Brian.
Yeah, it's a really difficult one. I think that Bitcoin doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's obviously impacted by so many different things. And even this morning, the latest development coming out of the UK with Theresa May's speech about Brexit, the arrival of Donald Trump on the scene, all of these things matter, and I think they impact on the price. So I think the geopolitical environment that we're going to see in 2017-18 is going to have a real significant impact on Bitcoin price. I think in a good way, simply because I think we're going to see a lot of political tensions all over the world. Certainly that's all of the forecasts that the commentators are commenting on right now. So I think we're actually about to enter into a positive period for Bitcoin price.
Yeah, I think that there's no chance of being able to separate the two. I know that some people temporarily are looking at blockchain as a separate issue. Certainly in the enterprise, it's being viewed as a separate issue from Bitcoin, but they're bound and glued together for eternity. And I believe the popularity of deploying blockchains will in fact actually increase the value of Bitcoin dramatically. In fact, I'm very bullish on one of my investments, Veriblock, which has created a proof of proof, which borrows and inherits the capability of the Bitcoin blockchain and provides it immediately to every other blockchain that gets created. That itself, I think, will be part of the vast groups of infrastructure that are delivered to the ecosystem. And when the ecosystem absorbs these fundamental technologies, the net result will be that Bitcoin will be part of the deployment strategy of transactions. It will rise in value based on the cumulative transactions that all of the various blockchains provide. And I think it will give another revenue stream to all of the miners that are involved with Bitcoin today. And that whole ecosystem is going to prosper, and on its back, Bitcoin will rise dramatically over the next 2 or 3 years.
Chandler.
I will ask a couple questions for all of you, and you can raise your hand when I ask a question. First question is, who here have Bitcoin? Raise your hand. Whoa, good.
A lot more than 3 years ago.
Yeah, much more than. Who knows the price of the Bitcoin? How much mining cost for one Bitcoin? Okay. For mining one Bitcoin, how much cost? Raise your hand. You can tell me the price? Almost. Who? Other? Today the electricity cost is $400 for each one Bitcoin. Okay. And including the mining farm cost, the equipment cost is almost $500 and to the $600 for one Bitcoin price to mining one Bitcoin, because today is almost 3,000 petahash. Okay, so.
Well, Chandler, doesn't it sort of equalize over time that it historically has been about a 10% profit for miners, so that when it gets too expensive, then people stop mining and the difficulty goes down, and when it goes up, then more petahash goes on, and it seems like historically it's been about 90% of the cost over the last, say, 4 years.
The Bitcoin, the mining today is 70% in China.
Okay.
But not owning the Chinese, the ownership is not only Chinese. It's a lot of the miner from all around the world, like Sean, like a lot of the big, the American investment, they go to the China to mining Bitcoin because the cheaper electricity. and next 4 years will be next halving, right? So if you holding, so I want another question is, who will holding the Bitcoin for another 4 years to waiting for next 4 years? Raise your hand. Okay, so do you believe the Bitcoin price go to the $10,000? Raise your hand. $10,000. Raise your hand. Okay, good. So other people don't believe that they go to $10,000, so you cannot raise your hand, right? Okay. So
4 years.
4 years, next halving. You know, this, all the world, the government is fuck. Right? European, England, and Indian, even China, here. Yeah, everywhere. So we like them, the fuck, you know. When they fuck, okay, our Bitcoin price grow up. Right? When they control they always want to control, they always out of control. Right? So we believe that if you believe the freedom, okay, if you believe the mathematic, okay, the people don't raise their hand, you can go back to buy just 1 Bitcoin. Go back. Well, buy 1 Bitcoin is enough. If all around the world people, okay, realize and buy 1 Bitcoin, I think the Bitcoin price across go to the $1 million in a couple years later. Okay.
Sean?
Thank you for your candor, Mr. Chandler. It's what I've come to appreciate with you, knowing you for the last couple of years.
Yeah.
So, Michael, back to your original question. I think to summarize, you sort of said, does Bitcoin price matter? Does Bitcoin price sort of direct people's focus?
What I said was, is the rise and what's going on geopolitically now bringing much of the focus back to Bitcoin from blockchain? Because, you know, started 2015 when Bitcoin was down under $200, everybody was running away as far as they could, and the old joke was if you had a Bitcoin business plan, you had to go and do a copy and paste and replace the name Bitcoin with blockchain.
That's right, global search and replace. Yeah. You know, when you asked that question, I was reminded of the fact that I grew up in Chicago, and I'm a Cubs fan. Because there's certain elements of this question that have to do with being a fair weather fan, and you know, my father, my uncles, and my grandfather, my whole life, you know, for more years than I'd care to share with this audience, were frustrated, and they were angry, and they were trying to ignore the team that they loved, and many people, you know, throughout our community and throughout the United States just ignored the team, and then all of a sudden they came back. And I think there's certainly an element of that in human psychology. And then the other thing that I'm reminded of is the first dot-com bubble. And during the first dot-com bubble, there was a big debate that I see as conceptually identical to the debate that we've had and the discussions that we've had between the Bitcoin blockchain and private blockchains. And the equivalent discussion was, well, let me say this in another way. It wasn't immediately clear to market participants that the public World Wide Web would win. There were a lot of very well-funded companies that were promoting and pushing private webs. And
The intranets.
correct. Walled gardens, and I'm sure a lot of people in this room may be a little too young to remember that, but I'm a little older.
America Online.
I'm not.
CompuServe.
And so to me, if you look at what Bitcoin is, which I believe is the best form of money that has ever been discovered by humankind, in order to address the litany of use cases that it offers up to its target markets, the market capitalization has to achieve a certain minimum threshold, because many of the use cases that we're going after simply aren't possible with such a small monetary base or such a small market cap. And so, yes, I strongly believe that Bitcoin price has brought people back to focus on Bitcoin from private blockchains.
So I'm gonna kind of pivot that question. It's a good segue into my next question, which is it used to be kind of like Bitcoin versus private blockchain. In the last couple of years, we've had an explosion of new public blockchains. I mean, even though people talk about enterprise uses of Ethereum, it trades, and it's traded wildly from 30 cents to almost $30 and back down to $11. So in the last year, I mean, we had a couple of what's known as token crowd sales and more colloquially ICOs in 2014. Two that I was, pleased to, fortunate enough to work with MaidSafe and Ethereum, obviously were very high profile, but there weren't that many that year. And then 2015, it was kind of a desert other than Augur. But then 2016, you literally, even taking the DAO aside, you had something like $150 million raised by companies just issuing their own token. And there's a lot of innovation going on now in new public blockchains. And a lot of it's coming out of China, obviously. A lot of it's coming on top of Ethereum assets. You have things like First Blood and Golem that both sold millions of dollars out in minutes. And so I want everybody's opinion in terms of what they see the future for new public blockchains, not just Bitcoin or private blockchains. Brian?
Okay, so I'm going to completely disagree. Our experience has actually been the opposite. In the last 12 months or so, we've had a lot of interest from various groups that want to come and work with us. But what they're telling us is that while obviously Bitcoin was the first iteration, if you like, of the underlying technology blockchain, they have various different distributed applications that they actually want to sit potentially on public blockchains. But more increasingly, what we're finding is that they want to do the exact opposite. They want to go for a private permissioned blockchain, and they want to get help with developing that. And that's all to do with the whole idea of protection or perceived protection, and it's to do with manipulating their own data. And I think it's a direct result of what happened in the last 12, 18 months with some big public blockchains that had some challenges, shall we say, and they've been widely publicized. And I think a lot of businesses have actually said, yeah, if we're going to go down this road and we're going to have investors invest heavily, we want to make sure that we're going to survive. So maybe the best way to do that is to have what is called a private permission blockchain, or in the case of some of the banks that we're working with, they called it a walled garden. So we see the whole shift away from public blockchain to a private permission blockchain. We see that's actually the future.
Whoop.
Yeah, I would take the exact opposite view.
Yay.
I think that private blockchains are stupid. And I believe that fundamentally they're missing the ingredients of decentralization, permissionless, etc. And I think that is certainly a phenomenon happening today. And there's nothing wrong with it, much as in the internet days there were those that wanted to do intranets for their own private walled gardens. But ultimately those gave up, and I believe that you'll see private blockchains go away.
So Flip, there's something in between public and private, and that would be the Hyperledger project. So what do you think about that?
There is nothing but the blockchain as Satoshi wanted it to be.
A purist.
And I think as a purist, I would say that's where it's going to go. And I think what people will discover is that fundamentally public blockchains will rely on Bitcoin as a base. That Bitcoin blockchain is the most secure public blockchain on the planet and always will be. It has an ability to burn a lot of resources in order to create value of security. And I believe all other blockchains are ultimately going to inherit that Bitcoin proof of work and really rely on proof of proof in terms of developing the kinds of systems that were envisioned. On top of that, there are other things that Bitcoin has going for it. One is it's expensive to mine. Two is it has security, and it can lend that security to every other blockchain and make a 2-day-old blockchain as secure as Bitcoin. That's a fundamentally radical idea that will transform this entire ecosystem. And then last but not least, you've got a situation where there's limited real estate in the blockchain that Bitcoin has, and it's very, very valuable. And it will ultimately be expressed in the value of the transactions that are made to go through borrowing the security of Bitcoin. That idea will create enormous value and will make $1 million per Bitcoin sound like a sleazy dream, when it's really going to be a lot more valuable than that as the ecosystem matures and public blockchains take over the world. And all of the kinds of IT that we used to think in terms of connected to individual corporations, now decentralization will take over, and the value that is there from the Bitcoin blockchain is immeasurable.
Well, I think Pantera was quoted as saying they thought they could get up to $4.2 million per Bitcoin, which would actually make it 10 times what gold is. Chandler, you probably, a lot of these coins have been coming out of China, and really Ethereum is incredibly popular with China. A lot of other ICOs are popular. What's your take on sort of the public blockchain versus private blockchain in China?
I will ask the question again. So who have the ETH? Raise your hand. Zcash. Okay. ETC. Okay. DAO. Okay. So today
He's trying to find the hacker.
Yeah, right.
maybe here, the public chain means build the trust, international trust. What is the international trust? International trust means that everywhere in the country, in the world, people believe that this blockchain must be the public and international, right? So if somebody want to make a Miami blockchain, and only Miami people believe that, no people, other world join that, it's not a public chain. So what exactly the public chain? I want to ask you. Top 5 of the blockchain. I already tell you the top 5. What are the top 5? You raise your hand, you hold that. Okay, the top 5 the blockchain. We're doing blockchain business here. Actually, we come to revolution, not a corporation. We come to here for revolution, not for corporation. A lot of the bank, financial company, big player, they are 2 years ago, they don't want to talk about a Bitcoin. They said Bitcoin just joke. But 2 years ago, they said blockchain maybe is good. A lot of the startup said blockchain, yeah, blockchain is good if the VC like that, if the bank like that. So they all make a business plan to cooperation with the bank, cooperation with the financial big player. But today, a lot of the big bank, a lot of the financial company realize this son of a bitch is come to here to revolution me, not a corporation me. Before that, they don't know. They said big blockchain technology, good. But finally, they will realize the blockchain technology will be totally destroy their system. So we come to revolution, not a corporation. Centralized always have problem. Even the Ethereum, the foundation, kind of the centralized, they can have a problem. So that's why they have ETC here. A lot of people will be support the totally public chain, no control, you know. If somebody want to control some chain, they're not of the public chain. So we will see that not only in the, you know, this is an international thing, not only Chinese or American can control it. It's totally the world business, you know. So I agree you.
I agree with you.
Yeah. We think the private chain is kind of bullshit.
So, Sean, I'm going to twist it a little bit, since this will be the last question before we go to questions. As sort of an active VC on the panel here, what do you think when a company, they used to say when a company does a Kickstarter, they like it to then fund them because they've already shown the ability to do sales, et cetera, et cetera. What do you think of the model where someone like Factom goes out, creates a blockchain, raises some money, and then goes out and does a private company too? It seems like more and more companies are doing that. Any thoughts on whether that's sort of the way to go versus Ethereum basically just had a foundation and then other people sort of just developed around it?
So you're
Sean, and then Flip.
Yeah, let me make sure I understand the question. You're asking, how do I feel about a new product, a new public blockchain that has a private company associated with it?
Well, the opposite. In other words, it used to be they'd come to you for money. Now they're like saying, we're going to go and raise it from the market. And then they might come to you for additional money.
Yeah. I think that to us, we're really looking for a company that has an investable product that has proven market viability, sort of an MVP that they've put out into the world, and they have some validated learnings to justify their argument, which is that we have potential to grow. One of the things that, you know, I was going to say in response to the previous question was, you know, public blockchains, private blockchains, my personal opinions aside, ultimately, we and all of us on this panel are fiduciaries of invested funds of other people, and our own funds too, of course. So what we have to think about is what's going to win, and what's going to win in the time horizon that we care about. You know, we're not making 100-year investments here, we're making 5-year investments here. And so the thing that's so amazing about Bitcoin is that it has achieved a certain critical mass that I think a lot of people underestimate the profound. It's just so unlikely. It's just so unlikely that a system like this, that's global, could ever have achieved critical mass for a litany of reasons. And so when we look at any company, whatever the sequence of the blockchain that they created and the company that they created, it's not really one of our key diligence criteria. What we're looking at is the combination of those two things and whether we believe that there's evidence to support their obvious argument, which is that, you know, they're going to take over the world or succeed in some big way, and it's going to provide a good return on investment for us.
Okay. So you can comment on that, and then we'll go to questions.
Yeah, I think that the answer is already visible in other parts of the universe. So, for example, I believe that permissionless, truly independent blockchains are going to be the prosperous ones long term. Short term, there's a lot of experimentation that in some cases will even yield venture capital profitability. But I think it's really in the value that particular blockchain brings to the market, to the entire ecosystem. Its token will gather that and absorb value. There are, however, examples like the following where we know open source for a long time. And there are individual organizations like Red Hat who have made it possible to deploy open source for people and be totally open. And I think that same model you'll see in this blockchain space, this ecosystem, where the really truly independent, permissionless, decentralized blockchains will win, but there will also be the potential for some organizations to help the world utilize those organizational opportunities called blockchain X and Y and Z. So therefore, yes, you can invest in a company and expect it to prosper, but in its consultative nature to making sure blockchains are utilized appropriately. And I would not be surprised, for example, if most of the private blockchains ultimately see the light and convert themselves into a truly decentralized public blockchain with the help of some organizations that can counsel them along the way and lose their fear and lose all of the trepidation that usually accompanies the thought process of a public blockchain.
Okay, so we have time for 3 minutes of questions, which is probably 1 or 2 questions. I don't want to step on Roger's time. Anybody with a question?
So we look at the management team. That's the first thing we do. The second thing is that our cornerstone with our business in the island is to keep crime out and to protect the consumer. So any aspects of that bring us into conflict will be an issue for us. But first thing we look at is the management team, and we go from there. But happy to talk to you outside this panel.
Brian, I think one of the biggest things that we look at is the runway. So how long for a new business that might come to us, how long is it going to be before it's financially sustainable? Because one of the things that's unique, we collectively at my firm have invested in a wide variety of vertical markets in our previous lives. And one of the things that's unique about this industry is that we're disrupting, whether it's revolutionary or cooperatively with the incumbent powers, we're disrupting one of the largest industries on the planet and the most heavily regulated industries on the planet. And so the biggest question for us is how much money does the business need before it can actually take wing? I think that we think that a lot of the businesses that are, taking money and making a go of it, while they're noble pursuits, they're just woefully underfunded because it takes too long. If you're going for an enterprise sale to the banking industry, it can take years before you make your first proof of concept sale. And so we look at, is it a realistic plan that can get some money coming in the door in a reasonable period of time?
I guess to your question, we were very aware that a lot of the startups that were coming to us were struggling with access to capital. And in the last 6 months, we've just introduced a new investment fund for digital businesses, including this industry. The total pot is $60 million. And so far, we've had about 93 applications. Some of those Bitcoin and blockchain businesses in there. So that was a direct response that we made to a very obvious deficit that's in the investment community. It's just that really good people are struggling to find access to capital.
Now you're going to get 5 times the number of people looking for your card. So I have to give everyone the hook because it's 11:40. I don't want to step on Roger. Thank you to the great panel. And everyone will be around the rest of the day for one-on-one questions. Thank you.